Most of us in the corporate world, we get pretty comfortable with limits, right? We look at the accepted industry standards, we build our quarterly forecasts right around them, and we basically just live within those boundaries. But what happens when you look at those limits and ask one really simple question? Why? Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are not looking at Elon Musk as just a visionary or some eccentric dreamer. We're breaking down his approach as a masterclass in shattering limits to drive radical corporate scalability and operational efficiency. If you're a busy executive looking to completely blow the ceiling off your margins, your speed to market, and your overall growth, well, you're in the right place. This is your playbook.
So here's our game plan for today. We're going to tackle this in 3 parts. First, the macro vision layer. Second, the micro execution layer. And finally, the macro strategy layer. Let's get right into it. Starting with section 1, the macro vision layer, focusing on mindset and cost analysis. Now, to achieve true radical scalability, you really have to break through that impossibility barrier. The invisible wall that usually dictates corporate forecasting. Think back to when Tesla first started. The legacy auto industry practically laughed them out of the room. They literally said, "You can't compete with us. You have no factories, you have zero experience. There is no way you'll ever make a profitable car." That right there is the classic legacy mindset. But Musk operates on a totally different foundational principle. To him, when someone tells you something is impossible, they aren't describing reality. They're just describing the limits of their own imagination. They're telling you what they can't do. So as an executive, the next time you hear that a target or a new market entry is quote-unquote impossible, your immediate reaction should be, according to whom? Don't ever let your competitors' limitations become your ceiling.
But how do you actually achieve that kind of radical cost efficiency in your operations? Well, you have to cut through those layers of assumptions and so-called industry standards. And you do this using first principles thinking. Most businesses, they operate on analogies. We do things because, well, that's how the industry does it, or our competitor did it this way, so we'll just try to do it 10% better. First principles thinking forces you to tear everything down to its absolute most basic truths and rebuild from scratch. For example, when the auto industry swore up and down that batteries were just way too expensive to ever make electric cars viable, Musk didn't just accept the supplier's price tag. Instead, he asked what batteries were fundamentally made of: cobalt, nickel, lithium, and then he looked at the raw material costs on the spot market. Turns out, it was a fraction of the price. And he applied that exact same logic to aerospace. When faced with literally astronomical supplier prices, Musk didn't do the usual executive thing. He didn't ask, "Hey, how can we negotiate a 5% discount?" He asked a much more fundamental question. What does a rocket actually cost to build?
Just look at the margin expansion here. It's absolutely wild. The industry standard, the accepted minimum everyone just lived with, was $65 million. But calculate the raw materials, the engineering, and the manufacturing, and the fundamental cost is actually somewhere between $5 and $10 million. Think about that. That $55 million difference wasn't some insurmountable barrier of technology. It was basically a tax on waste, inefficiency, and accepted mediocrity. By questioning the assumption instead of just blindly accepting it, you unlock a level of efficiency your competitors can't even fathom. When you stop paying the mediocrity tax of your industry, your enterprise margins fundamentally transform.
All right, moving to section 2, the micro execution layer, operations and speed.
So this is where the rubber meets the road. Massive transformations almost never come from one single dramatic breakthrough. They come from obsessing over a 1% improvement. When SpaceX was struggling in the early days, Musk was literally out on the factory floor, examining individual fasteners just to shave seconds off the assembly process. For you as an executive, this means getting out of the boardroom and really understanding the microscopic mechanics of your business. Because making a 1% compounding improvement across 100 different operational systems, that doesn't just make you marginally faster, it creates a fundamentally different, vastly superior product.
To pull this off, ambitious leaders have to be willing to think small. I know, it's incredibly easy to sit back and focus exclusively on the giant strategic pivots, but the real leverage, it's in the trenches. If you improve the 20 most important processes in your business by just 10% each, you've doubled your results. Doubled them. That isn't luck. That is disciplined, obsessive focus on the tiny details that everyone else is ignoring simply because they're perfectly satisfied with good enough. Let's talk about speed. Most legacy companies are stuck in a seriously bloated cycle. Plan for 6 months, test for 3 months, and eventually, maybe, launch. It's safe, it's slow, and honestly, it's entirely built on a fear of being wrong. Iterative velocity completely flips that script. It's launch, fail, learn, and launch again. Remember, SpaceX's first 3 rockets exploded.
literally blew up. But they didn't retreat into a 6-month planning phase to protect their egos. They used those failures as rapid R&D velocity. Perfectionism is essentially a prison that keeps your company stuck in endless preparation.
Because here's the harsh truth. The perfect moment simply does not exist. The only actual way to learn what works in the real market is to put it out there. So here's a challenge for you. Take one piece of your biggest, most complex corporate project right now and launch it in the next 7 days at 70% readiness. If you can do that, you're going to surpass 90% of your competitors. Why? Because they are still sitting around a boardroom table planning while you are out there actively learning and adapting.
Finally, let's zoom back out for Section 3, the macro strategy layer, supply chain and time horizons.
So how do you protect all that speed and efficiency once you've actually built it? You have to own the stack through vertical integration. Think about it. If you're depending on other people's systems, other people's timelines, and other people's technology, their limitations instantly become your limitations. You absolutely cannot break industry limits if you're tethered to the industry standard supply chain. Outsourcing might look really safe and clean on a balance sheet today, but it severely caps your growth potential tomorrow. Just contrast the legacy industry's heavy reliance on outsourcing with the strategic choice to have complete control. Early on, suppliers wanted a staggering $120 million per rocket engine from SpaceX. The response? No way, we'll build it in-house. Tesla does the exact same thing with batteries, motors, and computers. Now, you don't necessarily have to manufacture every single paperclip your office uses, but you cannot outsource your core knowledge. You have to build and control the capabilities that actually matter most to your ultimate goal. That's how you innovate faster and cheaper than anyone else in your space.
And speaking of that ultimate goal, achieving it requires a totally different time horizon. You really need to shift your board's focus away from next quarter's earnings and toward decade-level market dominance. When SpaceX started, sure, the 5-year goal was cheaper rockets, but the 20-year goal, Mars. Tesla wasn't just about launching a cool electric car. It was about accelerating a multi-decade global transition to sustainable energy.
When you adopt a 10-year vision, it completely rewires how you manage your business. It gives you the patience to endure those short-term failures without suddenly pivoting in a total panic. It gives you the freedom to invest heavily in capabilities and R&D that might not pay off for years. And maybe most importantly, it stops you from overreacting every single time a competitor makes a minor short-term move. When you think in decades, you are basically playing a game that your competitors don't even realize they're at. All right, let's tie this all together into your executive action plan. And don't worry, you don't need to completely overhaul your entire enterprise by tomorrow morning. Just pick one of these core strategies to master this week. Are you going to reject an impossible limit? Apply first principles to your biggest cost center? Are you going to get into the weeds and obsess over a 1% detail? Will you launch a project at 70% just to iterate fast? Will you take ownership of a critical piece of your supply chain? Or will you finally shift your strategic horizon from days to decades? Look, these aren't closely guarded secrets, they're choices. It's a systematic playbook for tearing down the walls that keep companies stagnant. So as you look at your own operations, your own teams, and your own industry standards today, I want to leave you with one final thought.